Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. In today's show, I'm taking a look at the second week of November. And if I was to sum up this week in a theme, I would be thinking about this as retrograde week. So that does mean we have Mercury starting its next retrograde. That happens on Sunday the 9th. But we have another planet, a really important planet, Jupiter, also turning retrograde this week. That happens just a couple of days later on the 11th. So I'm going to share some insights about what to expect and how to work with these retrograde themes this week. I'll also talk a little bit about how these two retrogrades are connected as well. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about my personal predictions retreat, which is happening in Palm Springs at the end of January. You can join me for a 3-day intensive where you learn all about secondary progressions, including the progressed lunar phase. And I'll take you through what your progressions are and what they might indicate for the year ahead. I'm also going to guide you through some of the most important transits for 2026, and you'll have a chance to explore how the trends and timing cycles of 2026 might activate your chart and life. If you'd like to join me on Astrology Retreat in Palm Springs, check out the calendar page on my website over at kellysastrology.com for more info. I'll also include the direct link to the event in the show notes below. Okay, so back to November and retrograde week. So we are looking at the week starting November 8th, and the first planet we're going to talk about is Mercury. So Mercury does turn retrograde and begin to reverse through the zodiac. That happens on Sunday, November 9th. Mercury's retrograde or reverse path is actually going to take it backwards from its station degree, so where it begins its retrograde, that's 6 Sagittarius on November 9th. And Mercury is going to reverse all the way back to 20 degrees of Scorpio. And so Mercury's retrograde will end on Sunday, November 29th. So if you want me to say that a different way, Mercury's retrograde runs from the 9th to the 29th of the month, from 6 degrees Sagittarius back to 20 degrees Scorpio. So that's important just if you want those details. Now, Mercury is going to have an especially trickster quality this second week of November. Mercury is retrograde and it's in the sign of its detriment, where it can already, be thinking outside the box or causing a little bit of chaos. So with this particular Mercury retrograde, you can think about it happening in two parts. The first part is when Mercury is retrograde and in Sagittarius, so that's November 9 back to November 18. The second part is when Mercury is retrograde in Scorpio, which is from November 18 to the 29th. Now, in these next 9 days or so, from the 9th to the 18th, while Mercury is retrograde and in Sagittarius, all of that classic Mercury retrograde advice does apply. So that means slow down, take extra time, read the fine print. Even if you feel confident and enthusiastic, slowing down is going to be worth it to help you try and catch any details that you might otherwise skip right over in your excitement to move forward. So Mercury in Sagittarius this week is, excited about possibilities, but is not intrinsically paying attention to details or specifics. So we need to kind of intentionally take over that skill. So with this Mercury retrograde, the start of Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, it feels like there are going to be some classic bloopers, some of those classic crossed wires, and there's probably going to be some delays as well. So if you can, build in extra gaps to your schedule and try to keep a patient mindset. There is a kind of frazzled or potentially frustrated quality that I don't want you to get caught up in if you don't have to. Misunderstandings, that idea of crossed wires or just being on different wavelengths, absolutely likely as well in this second week of November, especially around the 12th and again on the 14th. Now, life might actually seem really busy. You might feel like you are caught up in a flurry of activity with Mercury this week. Mercury in Sagittarius is very enthusiastic and very optimistic. Mercury in this place thinks everything's possible, and you might get to this week and think, I have said yes to too many things, or I've got too much to do, or I've got more going on than I can reasonably do to a good standard. And so once you get into this week, you might think, I'm going to have to change things up. Things are going to take longer. I need more time. There's some of the conversations you might find yourself having. Mercury also in Sagittarius loves to just keep things in motion. And so one challenge that I think we all have to figure out this week is to try and be busy in a way that actually moves things forward rather than just being busy for the sake of keeping busy. So we don't want to kind of be going around in circles and just, filling our days. We want to try to have a plan. We want to try to do things that are going to help build momentum. With Mercury retrograde, though, of course, we might have a bit of that firefighting energy where we're trying to stay on track, but we keep getting distracted and we're having to deal with immediate pressing things that delay our original intention. Needless to say, this is not the most productive, organized, or grounded version of Mercury this week. So you will quite likely have to do certain things more than once. You have a conversation and you think XYZ gets solved or sorted as a result of that conversation. And 3 days later, the person that you had that conversation with is back to clarify, or they're talking about something in such a way that you think, oh my gosh, my point didn't get across, or there was a misunderstanding. So be prepared to repeat yourself or to have to do things more than once. You might realize that a plan that you thought was totally sorted, locked in, actually has some glitches and is going to now require extra attention or even a big revision. So we're going to need to keep ourselves flexible because life is not going according to plan in this second week of November. Now, technology, travel, and transport might be especially full of snafus and delays. These are all important Mercury things, and because of Mercury's very trickster condition, we're going to see some of that classic Mercury kind of blooper or problem delay energy around technology matters, travel, and anything to do with transport and logistics. If you are traveling this week, I would opt for cancellation choices if you can, buy more flexibility into your ticket, build more flexibility into your schedule, make copies of important documents, give yourself loads of time to make deadlines or to, get to the train or plane on time. The idea of making copies of important documents or keeping a backup is really important and applies to all of us, regardless of what we're doing this week. So this isn't the week to assume that somebody else will take care of something. It's going to be better if you can do the kind of backup plan yourself. So that's sort of the best advice I can give you for Mercury retrograde this week, partly to help you understand that it's a little bit more than a regular Mercury retrograde, and there's another reason as to why. So here's the link from Mercury retrograde to Jupiter retrograde. Not only is it interesting that Jupiter will go retrograde just a couple of days after Mercury, but Mercury is actually going retrograde in a sign ruled by Jupiter. Another way I could say this, or we could think about this, is that not only is Mercury itself retrograde, but its guiding or ruling planet, the planet that can usually help it out or that might be compounding the issue, is also going to be retrograde. So Jupiter's retrograde starts on November 11, and Jupiter will be stationing to go retrograde at 25 Cancer. So for that period, most of that period that Mercury is retrograde in Sagittarius, its ruler, Jupiter, is also moving backwards. So here's the thing. Here's my question to you. Do you think that it helps Mercury to have its ruler also in reverse mode? Or might it compound those retrograde themes of revising, redoing, and going back over the recent past? Now, if you guessed option 2, you are spot on. Here is a little bit of a unique situation where we have a retrograde on top of another retrograde. So Jupiter being retrograde is likely going to compound or enhance or even exacerbate some of those classic Mercury retrograde conundrums. So the delay energy is like doubled up. The blooper energy is doubled up. The misunderstanding energy potentially doubled up as well. So as I say that, I don't want you to be like in a total fear state. We're all going to make our way through this week. We're all going to be, still grappling with life at the end of it. But at least we know if we feel particularly frazzled or frantic, or we feel like life has been especially frustrating, at least we're going to know why. Now, remember that the second part of Mercury retrograde is totally different. So once Mercury reverses back into Scorpio, which happens on the 18th, Mercury is going to be ruled by Mars, and Mars is definitely moving forward. So this kind of compounded retrograde theme is only applicable for this sort of 9-day window. And that's a clue that the piece of Mercury's retrograde that's most likely to be tricky and really test your patience is going to run from that November 9th to November 18th period. But let's pop back to Jupiter retrograde for a minute. So Jupiter has been racing through Cancer since early June when it came into Cancer, and has made its way almost to the end of Cancer, 25 degrees. The signs only have 30 degrees in it. So Jupiter has covered almost the entire sign of Cancer since the second week of June to now, the second week of November. And since early June, many of you will have been off and running with plans for growth, for healing, for connection, for nourishment since then. Some of you might even be working on a big life upgrade or taking some time to attune to the most tender and soulful dreams in your heart. And now we have Jupiter kind of hitting pause and beginning to retrace his steps. And this means that you too might find that it's time to pause, to reflect, and even to reconsider your intentions. You might reflect on your why. Why was that dream important? Why was that goal necessary? What hopes did I have? And then you might be reflecting on, are those dreams and hopes still important? Maybe you have actually achieved something. Maybe you had an intention for the last, number of months, and you're thinking, I really did that. I said that I wanted to do X and I followed through, and here's where I am now. Maybe you've learned something. Maybe you've grown in an important way. Maybe you have something to celebrate. Maybe you've achieved something. Maybe you want to take some time to really be proud of keeping a promise to yourself. So there's lots of ways this Jupiter retrograde might show up. And Jupiter, of course, is different in its tone, in its quality, in its energy, even in its timelines to Mercury. So Jupiter is going to be retrograde and in this kind of review and reconsider mode until the middle of March 2026. So it might make sense that you will want to pause plans for a more substantial change and instead perhaps be with what already is. Jupiter is retrograde in the sign of its exaltation, so that's very different from Mercury, which is retrograde in the sign of its detriment. And so Jupiter retrograde in Cancer might offer clues as to how you can enhance meaning and fulfillment right where you are in your current situation. You might find a deeper connection with people or places that you're already familiar with. So with people with places you're already familiar with. You can think of Jupiter in Cancer, especially this retrograde part, as about going deeper rather than about trying to cover more ground or cover more territory. Jupiter is now in a kind of cosmic holding pattern in the sky until March. Jupiter, in fact, this November, Jupiter is just hovering around a couple of degrees all month. So when a slower moving planet like Jupiter goes retrograde, it really is just kind of hanging out, just 24, 25, 24 degrees of Cancer. That's where Jupiter is all month. It's not actually covering a lot of territory. And that's why instead of covering a lot of ground, covering a lot of topics, expanding and growing in many ways, we're just kind of concentrating our attention and our energy on this very particular place or topic that is relevant to where you are right now. And so that means you might want to embrace where you are and to be with what's possible right now. Jupiter is great at seeing the possibilities and the options. And instead of getting really grand and big, we might be thinking a little more simple or a little more accessible or a little more close to home. What can I do in my immediate space or with my local community? There's something about Jupiter stationing that says wherever you are now there is an opportunity, and slowing down might be what helps you connect to it. So this slower pace of Jupiter, this kind of invitation to reflect, is going to prove really helpful once we get to March of 2026. So the time to kind of reflect and to go within and maybe go deeper from mid-November to mid-March 2026 means that once Jupiter gets going again in March, you will be kind of more settled within yourself or more clear about how you want to move forward and what you want to move towards. So it's slower, but in the grand scheme of things, the pause facilitates the future progress, if you like. So if we think about, okay, Mercury's going retrograde, Jupiter's going retrograde, November 9, November 11, it's definitely going to be a week of slowing down. Mercury and Jupiter are each associated with different timelines. Mercury with shorter, more immediate demands, while Jupiter, of course, is linked to longer, larger, and more impactful matters. But with both of these planets going retrograde within a couple of days of each other, and with one ruling the retrograde of the other, the message from the cosmos really feels very clear this week that it is time to pause, to stand still, to review, and to reconsider, to reflect, to go back, to have a follow-up conversation, to reread the information that you've already received. This might actually give you a chance to catch up on unfinished business. This is one of my favorite ways to work with Mercury retrograde. And I think this is really important with the Jupiter link this time around, that there are things that are lingering from the past few months that deserve more of your attention or deserve a look back or a check-in. And so this idea of catching up on unfinished business rather than starting new things or trying to push things forward quickly is a great way of working constructively with a Mercury retrograde, especially with this Jupiter piece. So the things you've been working on that aren't done yet, what can you do to try to check back in with them? Do you have to have a conversation with a person? Is there a document that you were meant to submit 2 months ago that you forgot that you can finally get to? That's the kind of thing we can do with this very retrograde week, this second week of November. This idea of Mercury and Jupiter both pausing and kind of standing still for a bit might actually give you a chance to simply be with who and what is as they are right now. So this is the state of your friendship, your relationship, your family situation. How can I be with this? Is there something I want to say in this space? Is there something I want to clarify or return to, just as things are now? So that's helpful. Instead of thinking, this is what we're doing next, have we digested everything that we have just raced through? And that idea of from the second week of November, instead of racing forward towards the end of the month or the end of the year, can you kind of slow down and enjoy the more subtle shift of pace? Maybe if you slow down, you can be present for a meaningful encounter or for an interesting experience. And one of the great solutions that is so simple with Mercury retrograde is to go slower, to do less, and to create space. So if you can do that, you might find that it's like a quality rather than a quantity piece, and that will naturally reduce, mistakes and bloopers and frustrations. So let me know how this very retrograde second week of November is showing up for you in the comments. What are the things that you're grappling with? Is there something that you're frustrated with? Is there something that you're intentionally slowing down with? Love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you'd like to gather together in person for some insightful astrology in January, I hope to see you in Palm Springs. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's show. I will catch you next time.